It's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be with you this morning. And I want to welcome you all to the Alachua County Administration Building. And also on behalf of the Alachua County County Commission, I would like to say welcome. And, during this course, Alachua County, in terms of the equity department, we created to address the issues in Alachua County. And also in terms of administratively here in the county about any old Jim Crow kind of laws that were in our county documents, and we wanted to make sure we addressed those documents. And so through that, with Commissioner Robert Hutchison, brought the idea about the Truth and Reconciliation process in Alachua County. And so we started and embarked on that. And then we also got in touch with EJI in Montgomery, Alabama. And so we here locally started to recognize the victims that were lynched in Alachua County. And if you have an opportunity today, I'd ask you please to go downstairs and look at the exhibit downstairs of the lynched victims in Alachua County. Again, I want to welcome you all to the other book lecture series, which I think has been great thus far in terms of my information. I'm a funeral director, so on Saturdays it's very, very hard for me to kind of make these events, but I wanted to make sure I made one of these events because I thought this is very, very important. And I want to thank Dr. Rik Stevenson and Dr. Michelle Dunlap for their services and what they're going to bring the information to us today about Alachua County in the Jim Crow era in Alachua County. And I think I've covered most of the things I was supposed to cover. And I just want to share one thing about you since we're talking about the Jim Crow era about Alachua County. I just want to give the experience that my dad had in Alachua County in terms of the Jim Crow law. He was a part of the NAACP Youth Council. And so they were doing sit-ins in like Woolworth, and I think it was Wise Drugstore. And they did those sit-ins. And so he had a life-threatening situation from folks in the community about the sit-ins. And so I remember him telling the story that they said that they were going to set our business afire, which is Chestnut Funeral Home on 8th Avenue. They were going to set it afire. And so he said that night him and a couple of friends got together with some shotguns and they sat on top of the funeral home to make sure that no one was going to come and set it afire. So those are just some of the things that he shared with me in terms of Alachua County. And one of the other things he shared with me that back then in those type days, back in the 60s, I guess, in the early 50s, he got drafted into the war, but he was the only male in our family. And normally if there's only one male in the family, they don't get sent to war. But he did get sent. And that was the local, in terms of what he explained to me, that was the local folks in this community set that up for him to go to get killed. And so those are the stories he shared with me about what actually happened. He said things were bad just like it was all over the country. It wasn't any difference here in Alachua County. So I just wanted to share that. And again, thank you all for coming. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to take a little risk right now. I don't know how much you can handle the stimulation that you get when you are confronted with two brown-skinned men with bald heads at the same time. So try not to have the vapors and do the best you can. I'm Ron Nutter. I'm a member of United Church of Gainesville, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. 30 years ago, maybe a little more, the pastor at UCG said to me, he said, Ron, we're here on 5th Avenue, and we have an elementary school just to the west of us. And those kids live sort of to the east of us in the Near East. And they have Wednesday afternoons off, so they have to go home. They have to walk past here and go home. But in many cases, their parents have to work. They can't be at home with them. And they don't have anywhere to, maybe nothing to do at home. And I wonder if it wouldn't be a good idea for us to open the church and have something like a little recreational study kind of place for the kids to come. And I wonder, he said to me, he said, I wonder if maybe you would sort of take some leadership in that. I said, sure, Larry, we can do it. What the heck? You know, I was still arrogant enough then to think I could do anything. And I contacted some students at the University of Florida and asked them if they would spend their time building this program and staffing it with me. And one of those students did what students do. She graduated. She got more degrees. She became a contributor to knowledge and understanding. She became the first woman to achieve Professor Emeritus status from her institution, the Connecticut State University. And she gave me another good reason for being glad that I've lived this long. It is with great pride that I give you today's speaker, Michelle Dunlap. She's been with UCG a long time. Dr. Dunlap.
Good morning, everybody. I give thanks to God for allowing me to be here this morning and for hopefully using me to help further educate the community. And I'm always ready to learn from the community as well. So I want to thank Dr. Rik Stevenson and Dr. Nutter and all of the Alachua County officials and all of the community organizations who make this possible. This is very, very rare, what is happening here. So I'm just so thrilled to be a part of it. So before I get started, I want you to be aware of your own emotions as we're talking this morning, because you're going to hear a lot of painful things. And the reason I want you to be aware of your emotions, even if you just jot them down, if it's anger, upset, guilt, relief, anxiety, whatever it is, make a note of it, because towards the end of my presentation, I've kind of added a little something on to the presentation to kind of help us emotionally as we grapple with these very, very tough issues. So just be aware of your emotions. Don't just let it pass you by, but kind of make a note, even if it's just mentally or in writing, of how you're feeling, okay? Okay, so we're going to be talking about retail racism, Jim Crow versus 2025, okay? And I do have a website, drmichelleteaches.com, drmichelleteaches.com, just so that you know how you can reach me, or if you want to know more about my work, there is a way that you can get in touch with me, and I also have an email address and so forth. But all that information is on my website. Okay, so there's a couple of things I'm going to cover with this slide, but I actually did this slide on January 24th. So I did my whole PowerPoint on January 24th. And there were two things that occurred to me since that time that aren't on the slide. So I'm going to mention those right up front. Okay, the first is when we think about the marketplace, when we're talking about retail racism, we're talking about what happens to primarily Black people, but also brown people, out in the marketplace. It could be the store, the bank, the laundromat. It could be the insurance company. It could be the utility company, but wherever. So that's what we're talking about. But one thought that occurred to me is that African Americans, people who come from the ancestors who were captured with guns. Guns is what allowed all of this to happen. If there weren't guns, the Europeans would have gotten a beat down like they never knew before, okay? Okay, but anyway, so we were captured, we were enslaved, and so forth. And African Americans, people from those ancestors, okay, those ancestors are the only people, the African American people who come from that enslavement experience, are the only people who have the generational awful legacy of being a commodity in the marketplace. So that in itself makes our experience very unique. That's something I didn't even think to put in my book at the time that I was writing it. I mean, that thought just really just occurred to me in the past couple of weeks. So that in itself makes our experience very unique in the marketplace, that there was a time where we weren't doing the buying, we were being bought. Like we were being bought as if we were objects, you know, that you could, well, anyway, you all get my point, right? Okay, so that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is right away I want to give you a little example of like how the marketplace issues for Black, brown, especially Black people with brown people, and also poor white people, how these issues are very, very complex and how they are built into the system in very immoral, exploitive, illegal ways. I'm gonna give you an example, and that's with the turpentine pulling industry that was very big here in Alachua County. And I have the Writers Alliance of Gainesville to thank for this because I'm a member of the Writers Alliance, and we did this project where we had to pick out posters at the Matheson Museum, and we got to pick a few, and then they would tell us which one we have. So I ended up with one of a man. It said Archer, Florida. I don't remember the year. It might have been the 1930s. It said Archer, Florida, and it had a Black man at a tree, and he was working on the tree. He was turpentine pulling. So that allowed me to do some research because the assignment was to write a 500-word story about your postcard. Okay, so I found out so much about the turpentine pulling industry. So I'm just going to just give you a little taste of it, and then we'll go on with what I prepared earlier. I found out that, first of all, the turpentine pulling was a very precarious industry. You could die very easily. You could fall from a tree. You could get burnt. You could get, there was machinery involved. There was hot chemicals. There was all kinds of things, and it was very precarious. A lot of people would die right away. Like, but how did they keep supplying the industry? Well, what they did was they came up with these laws. Some people call them vagrancy laws, part of the Jim Crow machinery that you're going to be hearing about throughout this entire morning. What they would do was they came up with these laws where if you stood on a corner or you dropped a cigarette butt or you looked at someone the wrong way, there have been laws for looking at someone in the eye. Okay? Any little thing that you did wrong, you'd find yourself in prison. And then once you were in prison, now mind you, these are our legislators, our senators and our legislators and so forth, who were creating these laws, who were in bed with the turpentine industry, okay? So they were pulling in the people to work in the turpentine industry, mostly black bodies and poor white people, who were being pulled in for dropping a cigarette butt or whatever. And then they're working in this very dangerous industry, and they were dropping like flies. And they were able to get all the people involved, they were able to get them to agree that they died of natural causes. They died of natural causes. So that meant their families got no money. There wouldn't be any money to bury them. It was just awful. So families were losing their family, and they were getting paid like less than a penny a week or whatever, some outrageously small amount of money, because they were wards of the state, because they were being imprisoned. So that was a marketplace. Okay, that was a marketplace. And think about all the layers that I'm telling you about involved. Law enforcement, the legislators, the healthcare industry, and the people who do the burials and things like that. Everyone was agreeing. The person in the state, I'm having a brain freeze, who does the autopsies, if they do an autopsy, the medical examiners, they were all agreeing that this is natural causes, okay, when these people were dying due to the precarity on the job. So those were the two things I wanted to kind of talk about. And so that was a Jim Crow era kind of thing. Okay, so now let's move forward. Let's talk a little bit about Emmett Till in the marketplace. We've heard a lot about Emmett Till, 14 years old, just going to like a little restaurant type, little place to get a sandwich, maybe a soda, or to buy a little game or something if they had a little store attached to it. And some woman accuses him of looking at her the wrong way. And within a couple of days, this 14-year-old boy who was just visiting from New York ends up dead, ends up basically lynched, dragged through the town and so forth. He was just going to the store, okay? So a lot of the lynching incidences, a lot of the deaths, the wrongful deaths and so forth, begin in a marketplace environment, like not out in the middle of the woods or, not on someone's, farm or, yes, many things happened on plantations and so forth, but we're talking about the marketplace. We don't think of the marketplace as a site for lynchings and so forth, but it has been. And this is in the emotional DNA of Black people, in our emotional DNA, okay? I went to a fair here in 2009. I'm not going to say where, but it was in this county, with my child, who was maybe 8 years old at the time. And it was during the fall, and they had a fright trail for the kids, a fright trail. And my son was like, I want to go. Okay, all right, so we're going. So, they had people jumping out the bushes, boo, and all of that. But towards the end of the trail, they had a lynching scene. A bigger than human-sized effigy of a person that they were hoisting up and then letting it fall down and do this. And my son was like, oh, and I was like, oh. He didn't understand what he was looking at. He was just amazed by the mechanics of this, And I was stumbling to get out of that thing, and he didn't understand. I took him back to my mom's, and my mom, she lived here in this county, and I took him back to her, and I went back up there, and I gave it to them good, okay? And they said, but it's a white man being lynched. And I said, do you think that I am so morally depraved that I would think that it's okay for you to have a lynching scene because it's a white man? Anyway, they shut that thing down, okay? That's all I could tell you. They shut it down, okay? Okay, but anyway, so that was in 2009. All right, but anyway, let's get back. I want you to realize that the marketplace is a site for danger, losing your life, for trauma, and for vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is the trauma that we Black people experience when we see our family members suffering. When we see our family members go through this, when we remember what our family members went through, and when we see our children go through it, that's vicarious trauma. And our brain doesn't know, when we're experiencing vicarious trauma, our brain doesn't know whether we're personally experiencing it or whether someone else is experiencing it. So that's a lot that's heavy on our hearts. Okay, so please keep that in mind. And we got to go to work every day. We're trying to smile. We're trying to be, what's wrong with her? She's not smiling today. Like, come on. Just let people be people. Do you require everyone to smile all the time? Or just certain people? I'm just using that as an example, okay? So we go through these things at any given moment, on any given day, or our loved ones are going through these things, and we got to keep it moving. We got to keep it moving, okay? Because we don't have the privilege to say, I'm walking off this job, or I'm going to protest up in this store and then get arrested, and I don't have any money for a lawyer, or so forth. So we're very, very vulnerable, even today out here in the marketplace. Okay, so Latasha Harlins, I'm just kind of giving us some examples. In I think it was 1991 or 92, 91, thank you, Dr. Rik. 1991, going to a store in Los Angeles. It was a store owned by another minority group, which I'm not going to call out right now because I don't want us stereotyping that group. But she goes in with $1, and she gets a bottle of water out of the case, and then she changes her mind, and she puts the water back. So she goes up to the counter. She's going to buy something else with her $1, okay? 1991, $1, 15-year-old probably felt a little rich. I got $1. She couldn't decide what she was going to buy with it. The shop owner begins to, a woman shop owner, and that's another thing. People think that Black women are supposed to feel safe around all women, okay? Supposed to feel safe around white women because we're all women, okay? I've had white women say this to me before in academia, okay? And my colleagues have heard white women say this. My other Black colleagues have heard white women say this at their various institutions. You're safe with us. We're all women, okay? But Are we always safe? Are we always safe? Just think about that. So here, little Latasha is in a store. A female store owner accuses her of stealing the water. And she and the shop owner, you know, they end up tussling, and she pulls out a shotgun and kills Latasha Harlins dead. Okay, Latasha, they say that incident helped to inspire the LA riots and so forth that came not too long after that. And I must say, Tupac Shakur, he wrote a song about it, or where he included Latasha in the song, and he said, "Latasha, tell that lady she's forgiven and to go back home, or to come back home." I think he said, "Latasha, tell that lady she's forgiven and to come back home." I mean, black people are so forgiving. Here, Tupac Shakur, with all the negative stereotypes we have of Tupac Shakur, a lot of people don't know that Tupac Shakur was an amazing poet. Some of the most beautiful poetry I have ever read is of Tupac Shakur's poetry. It's not the kind of thing you're going to hear in the mainstream because, you know, sex and drugs and all that stuff sells in the mainstream. But if you haven't read any of Tupac's poetry, please do. There's a wonderful book of his poetry, maybe even more than one book, but the volume that I've read, it's written in his own handwriting on one page and then typed on the other page. So you get to see in his own handwriting the beautiful poems that he wrote about equality, about heart changes in our heart. When your heart turns cold, a baby's laughter means nothing. When your heart turns cold, you don't understand how I behave? Just wait. Just wait till your heart turns cold. That's so profound, so profound. That's a whole psychology class right there. Just in that, I mean, the whole poem is just incredible, okay? But Tupac, he even sung about Latasha Harlins. Then we have Trayvon Martin going to the store to get an iced tea and some Skittles and can't even make it home alive, okay? But all that started with a marketplace experience, just trying to get to the store. And a lot of incidents happen on the way to the mall, coming back from the mall, or on the way to the store, coming back, where someone has found fault, found a problem with you just walking down the street. Okay, maybe sometimes, unfortunately, it's the people we're supposed to trust the most, our law enforcement, okay? Then there's Eric Garner standing in front of a marketplace, selling little, I think they call them onesies or something, selling individual cigarettes, and next thing you know, he's in a chokehold and he's dead, okay? But that's right in front of a little row of marketplaces. Okay, then there's George Floyd. We know that story all too well. That started in a marketplace. Someone found fault with his $20 bill or whatever. For whatever reason, a problem jumped off in the store, and he goes outside and unfortunately never makes it home. Okay, numerous tragedies, traumas, and injuries. I could go on and on and on, but I'm going to give you a few examples that I talk about in my book. Okay, what I did was I interviewed 19 people from around the country, including here in Florida, people from around the country, and I also read over 500 journal articles, news clippings. I stopped counting at 500, so it was well over, but they're all mentioned in the book. I referenced everything. Okay, so a black woman goes to a fast food restaurant that has a buffet. This is pre-coronavirus. goes to a fast food restaurant that has a buffet. She fixes her plate. Actually, she's with a friend, a white woman, okay? They fix their plates. They go sit down. There's a couple sitting nearby, a husband and a wife. I assume a husband and a wife. She assumed a husband and a wife. And they're stealing everything from the buffet. They're going up to the buffet numerous times. They're putting stuff in their purses, in their shopping bags. They're taking chicken. They're taking some of everything, this white couple, okay? But the staff, who was also a minority from another country, and again, I'm not going to name countries because I'm not trying to have us stereotype people, but the managers or owners, I don't know, but whoever was in charge, they were so busy watching the black woman that they didn't see these white people stealing them blind, okay? And this, everyone knows, well, not everyone, but our young people know this so well, that this is what's happening, that the black kids are being watched, the black and brown kids, and the white kids aren't. That what they do sometimes, the black and the black and brown kids and the white kids will work in synchrony. They'll work together, and the black kids will go into the store first. Everybody's watching the black and the brown kids, and then the white kids go in after them, steal everything they can get their hands on. Then they all meet up afterwards and they share everything. Okay? All right? Okay, I've been hearing about it through the years. All right? Okay, a young man goes to a grocery store to return a bottle of vitamins. He's in line, and there's two lines at customer service because there's two clerks, so there's two lines. There's another person there who's at a grocery store returning a used rug, okay, with no receipt. He has a receipt for his unopened vitamins. The rug person has no receipt, a white person, okay? The person with the rug gets a refund. There's no tag on the rug, just says how much the rug costs, gets a refund, no question asked. The person with the vitamins and the receipt is told, we can't give you a refund. We just can't. No. It started with, I need to see your license. I need to see your license. So he gives the clerk his license, and the clerk goes over to some big black book and starts writing his name and all this information in the big black book. So then the young man says, "Excuse me, why are you writing my information in this big black book?" And she says, "Don't you worry about that." Okay, so anyway, at one point, the clerk got busy, and he kind of went and looked to the side. She had closed the book, and the book said, "Book of Liars, Thieves, and Shoplifters." Okay, anyway, he never got the refund. It sent him into a psychological turmoil. He left the store. He was extremely depressed. He had to get medication. And a lot of the people who told me stories, they had to go get mental health services and sometimes medication for the experiences that they experienced in the marketplace. Okay, a woman goes to the grocery store. She goes to, I'm sorry, this is, I'm skipping ahead. A woman, a senior citizen, goes to a department store to buy some women's personal items, okay? She goes and tries on the items and puts them back and so forth. Security comes up We think you stole something. Follow us. You must come with us. They take her down into some dark corridors, some dark rooms where she's feeling alone and isolated, and they're telling her, give up the goods, give up the stuff. We know you have it. And she's like, I don't have anything. I didn't take anything. Call the police. Let the police come and search me. Call the police. They wouldn't call the police. She ends up pulling her clothes up to show them that she doesn't have anything, okay? In the meantime, one of the officers, a female officer, ends up assaulting her and pulls out some of her, they're called Nubian locks, that she had been growing. And part of her Nubian locks came out of her head from the security officer, the female security officer, tussling and fighting with her. And the whole while she's begging, please call the police. I know this is shocking. And again, make note of how you're feeling, because a lot of people don't know. But can you imagine how many years it may take that woman to get over that incident? Just going to the store, I want to buy some personal things. And black and brown people were the first people to say, oh, we're just going to shop online. They lost us first. They lost us first, I'm telling you. Okay, because I know, because I did the research. I did the book. We said it first. And there's all these strategies that we have for coping. Like, I'm going to shop online, or I bet you, if you're black or brown, you know someone like this. I'm just going in the store, I'm getting what I need, and I'm running right out. No such thing as browsing. I'm just going to get what I need, and I'm coming right back out. Okay, that's how some people cope. Okay, there's many different ways of coping that people have. But some people feel like, oh, we're going to go to the mall, and we're going to browse, and we're going to have fun. And, you know, and other people are like, no, I don't think so. I think we're going to stay home. And then we have our kids who want to do this. Okay. Oh, we're going to go to the mall. We're going to hang out with our friends. I have it in the slides coming up. There's this whole indoctrination that parents, that black and brown parents give our kids about going to the mall. Or in the case of my kids, living up in Connecticut, the kids like to hang out at the casino. Okay, not to gamble, but in the social part where you can socialize. They like to go to the casino. Okay, it's like a whole 45-minute lecture they have to listen to, and I bet you that lecture is 95% the same for every black family. We can tell you what the components are. Don't even look like you're putting anything in your pocket. In fact, don't wear anything too puffy. Wear something nice and slim. Don't wear anything puffy. Don't be fooling around, playing around, acting like you don't have any home training. Like all these restrictions. It's called the talk, okay? And 99% of the black families know the talk very well and can repeat it to you. And I'm telling you, it will have a 95% consistency across families. Okay, then a woman goes to the grocery store. She goes in the bathroom to take care of a personal matter. She comes out. She is accused of stealing in front of her teenage son. Okay? It turns into a big ordeal. They're threatening to call the police, and she's like, call the police. Please call the police. Okay? But anyway, it turned into a big day-long trauma, not only for her, but for her teenage son as well. Again, when it happens to any one person, it's having a ripple effect to the entire family. And there's so many incidences I could tell you about. Just want to make sure. Okay. So when I'm describing retail racism to people, people will come up to me at a book festival, And they'll say, what's your book about? And then I tell them what it's about. It's about experiences that Black and brown people have in the marketplace. So people who aren't people of color, they'll say, oh, I have a friend who was treated unfairly. And I can relate because that really hurt my friend. My friend really went through a lot. And then sometimes white folks say, well, I never knew such a thing existed. I never had to think about it, but I'm going to be thinking about this. And then you have some folks who will say, oh, hi, bye. You know, like they don't know where to put it when you explain that there's this whole thing that they've never had to think about. And it's like, oh, okay, see you later. Like it's just too much. And again, that's for them. But some of us have to live with it every moment of the day. But that's why I want everyone to be aware of your emotional process, okay? How are you feeling? Because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, African Americans and other people of color, most of the time when I tell them what the book is about, they say, oh, that happened to me, and I got to tell you this story. Let me tell you what happened. And they want to tell you the whole thing. They want to get it off their chest. It happened to them or their family member or their child. They tell me about the talk, about their children and the talk. And then some will give some variation of, that's why I don't go out to shop anymore. That's why I shop online. I'm just giving you a sampling of some of the ways that people respond. Okay, so some of the mainstream perceptions, there's going to be variations from person to person in any group. So I'm not trying to stereotype whole groups of people, but the vast majority of mainstream America, they think of, like I said earlier, malls and things like that as places of fellowship and, kind of pleasant. But then perceptions of the consumer marketplace held by Black and brown people involves trauma that we carry and vicarious trauma that we hold. And I've talked about that already. Okay, in one study of 55 middle-class Black New Yorkers, and again, I've seen study after study after study after study. I'm just giving you one example. One study of 55 middle-class Black New Yorkers, and these are middle-class Black New Yorkers, okay? 80% reported experiencing racial stigmatization and stereotyping in the consumer marketplace. This study was done by Professor Cassie Pittman at Case Western University. 59% reported being perceived as a shoplifter. Can you imagine going to a store and you're more likely to be perceived as a shoplifter than not? And over and over and over again, 52% reported poor or no service. That's where you're just being ignored. But if you pick up something and look at it too hard, you're not going to be ignored anymore. Okay. 52% reported being perceived as poor. And I had that happen to me with my children. I talk about that in the book, where one day I took my younger son and my nephew, I took them to the convenience store. It was after school. And, they were hungry. They wanted snacks. We go. They get their snacks. They're all excited. It's a happy day. The sun is shining. And the lady, the white woman behind the counter says, will that be cash or EBT, which is electronic benefits, which I am not opposed to. There was a time in my life when I was a single parent to an adopted child and a student where I qualified for services. So I got my child on WIC and everything else that I could possibly sign up for. And it was a big help to us because here I was, a graduate student, trying to take on raising a child that was in a bad situation. and that child, along with my other son, both of my children are adopted, but they are the light and the joy of my life. And my oldest son is 37, my younger son is 23. Okay, but anyway, I'm in the store and she's asking for cash or EBT. I'm a college professor now, and I'm like, I don't mind her asking for it. It's just the fact that she forgot the other options. She forgot to ask me for credit or debit. So if she had said, is it cash, EBT, credit, or debit, I could have gotten with that. But she just stopped with EBT, cash or EBT. And so, I ended up writing a little, I wrote in my journal that day about it. I wasn't going to address it in front of my kids. My older son, he knows me to address it in front of him. But I did not want to traumatize my younger son that way, okay? He had more vulnerabilities. I wasn't going to add more, to what he had already been through. Okay, so in my book, like I said, I referenced the 500 studies and documented incidences to give us a full picture of this emotionally draining experience. I told you about the 19 participants. They were a pretty diverse group. I had 3 white people in my data set, okay? Which, I really appreciated them telling their stories. And most of their stories was the story of privilege, that they have been standing in line and have noticed how the black person in front of them were being treated compared to how they were being treated. And so they are very sensitized to the privileges that they hold that other people don't hold, and they wanted to tell that story of what they've seen and how it impacted them. Okay, so the themes that emerge are monitoring inequitable experiences, trauma and vicarious trauma, people trying to make meaning of it philosophically, and then also how do we resist these experiences. I also want to tell you there's a lot of these experiences in Florida, people getting killed in Dollar Generals, black store clerks, made some white man mad, and he went out to his car and got his gun and threatened her. And these are talked about on the U.S. Department of Justice archives, where people have gotten shot, killed, threatened with guns, and so forth. This is happening today. Okay, so I won't go through each one in the interest of time. I know that I'm running out of my time here, but please know, if you want to know what's going on today in Florida, check out the archives of the U.S. Department of Justice put in Florida, and you will be shocked by people with white supremacist ideology and so forth going into a Dollar General, randomly shooting up the black people because they couldn't get into the historically black college campus earlier that day to do it. So they did it at a Dollar General. Things like that. It's really, really shocking, the things that are going on in the marketplace. Okay, so this is my book, Retail Racism, Shopping While Black and Brown in America. Again, I go into depth and I offer the interviews concerning monitoring, inequitable treatment, traumas, and then philosophical meaning making. How do we make sense of this? How do we keep going? And then I also offer recommendations after each one of these sections for people who are going to shop, and also for marketplaces, so that the marketplaces can do a better job. Okay, so I've kind of talked about the threads. Here's the last piece I just want to mention. I've done some work on trying to understand the emotional process that we go through when trying to think about race. And a couple of the pieces that I've written in 2011 and 2013 involve looking at the emotional process of racial identity development, how we think about race, how important we think racial issues are to us, and so forth. There's a lot of work that's been done on that, but I took the work that had been done and I compare it to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's theory of death and dying. So some people are in denial about race. Why are we even talking about this? Some people are very angry about it. Some people are in bargaining, trying to work it out. They're grappling, trying to figure it out. Some people are in depression about it and just withdrawing. And then some people are in acceptance, where they're combining with other groups and trying to rally to make change. And we might go in and out of these stages depending on what's going on around us and in our lives. Okay, so if you want to know more about that, just ask me for that. But just know that whatever you're feeling emotionally may be a normal part of this process, because learning about race, learning about what other people go through, involves dying to our ideas about what's normal and how the society operates. So that's why it makes sense for it to be related to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's theory of death and dying. Okay? We got to remember to self-care. We got to remember to resist. And we got to remember allies who care about us. Don't make us do all the work. Remember those two allies in Starbucks who stepped up to the plate when the brothers were being treated badly? Or the folks at the park who told Becky, stand down, you're not going to do this to my friends? You know, like, we need allies. This stuff hurts. It's tiring. It can make us sick. It can make us sick. It can make us die early. If you don't know, black and brown people tend to get major diseases 10 years earlier than their white counterparts, and tend to die a lot earlier too, leaving behind children that they're taking care of and so forth, because of epidemics that were brought into our community that devastated our communities, causing grandparents and aunts and uncles to have to step in and raise the kids. And I know what I'm talking about, okay, from personal experience. Okay, so, you know, we need to do better. We need our allies to do this work. And many of you are doing this work. Many of our allies are doing this work, but we need more. We shouldn't have to always be putting our neck out there on the line. These are my other books, and I want to thank you all so much for listening to me, for giving me your time. I hope that you found it worth it. Thank you.
Let's take a moment and stand up if you need to stand for a moment. Is it possible for me to get a glass of water or a bottle of water and maybe some scotch? Yeah, just shake it up a little bit. If you need to run to the restroom, give us a couple seconds. Man, let's give Dr. Dunlap another round of applause. Thank you so much. Okay, you may be seated if you want to. I'm not. Okay, so I don't have any slides, and I did that for a reason. So I'd like you to take a moment. If I step over here, you can still see me, right? All right, I want you to take a moment. If you're taking notes, if you have your phone, I want you to write down the first word that came to your mind when you saw me stand behind the podium. The first word, whatever the word may have been, just write it down real quickly. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So our discussion today is about Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a system that has its roots in Reconstruction. And what most people don't understand or know about Jim Crowism is that Jim Crow was not a class system, it was a caste system. And if you understand anything about caste, once you are in that caste, no matter how high you go financially, economically, you are still caste in the same system. That's why a poor person who lives in West Virginia who's living off of the coal mines that have been closed would rather be white and poor than have a PhD and be black or brown, because the caste plays a different role. And I think that one of the problems that we don't understand about how Jim Crow has affected us is its role in what we call epigenetics. Now, Dr. Dunlap mentioned something like that. I wrote an article, actually a commentary, in a book entitled A Commentary on Epigenetics, Cultural Trauma, Collective Memory, and Weathering. And epigenetics is like DNA. Your DNA can be passed on, and it's passed on from one generation to the next in the gene pool. Epigenetics is the same way, but it comes from trauma. The difference is this: you can't change your DNA, but you can change your epigenetic format. But what we don't talk about is that black and brown people, thank you so much, have experienced this trauma of what it means to be black or brown in America, and there's no psychological assistance. If you have PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, police officers, fire departments, military, they can go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist and sit down and talk through the problem. There's never been a time when the person who was enslaved could go to a psychologist and talk about the problem. And so Jim Crow, which I'm going to go back to in a minute, kind of set the stage for that because of its role after Reconstruction. Historically speaking, Reconstruction was that time after the Civil War when black people were free. I use that in quotes. You have the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment written. It's illegal to make people slaves. The right to vote was given to black men. Women couldn't vote. And Dr. Dunlap talked about this system where she talked about vagrancy. That was connected to this concept called convict leasing. Convict leasing came into existence during Jim Crow as a way of revitalizing slavery legally. Today we would call that the preschool to prison pipeline. And I want to read something to you to show you why it's so important to have these kinds of conversations. In 1898, in Wilmington, North Carolina, there were 23 African Americans in the Congress and the Senate. The first African American elected to the Congress was in 1870, 5 years after the war was over. The reason for that is before 1904, 1902, the majority of the black population lived below the Mason-Dixon line. So when they had access to vote, they did, so they could control the electorate. And so you have all these black people who are now in government. And then in 1896, there's a riot in Wilmington, North Carolina. white supremacists, they overthrow the government, similar to January 6th. And after that, 2 years later, they write this document. And I need you to really hear what this document says, because it demonstrates to us how Jim Crow is not just an event, it's a part of the fabric of what it means to live in America. We would argue, well, Jim Crow ended after the Second Reconstruction. No, it didn't. It just took on a different face. But I want you to listen to this, because this is how black and brown people are perceived in the United States. And I quote, this is from a document called The White Declaration of Independence, written in North Carolina, 1898, November 10. Believing that the Constitution of the United States contemplated a government to be carried out by an enlightened people, believing that its framers did not anticipate the enfranchisement of an ignorant population of African origin, and believing that the men of the state of North Carolina who joined in forming the Union did not contemplate for their descendants of subjection to the inferior race, we, the undersigned citizens of Wilmington and Hanover, do hereby declare that we will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin. The conditions we have in part endured because we felt that the consequences of the war, of secession, the Civil War, were such to deprive us of a fair consideration of many of our countrymen. We believe that after more than 30 years, this is no longer the case. The stand we now pledge ourselves to was forced upon us suddenly by a crisis, and our eyes are open to the fact that we must act now and leave our descendants to a fate too gloomy to be borne. While we recognize the authority of the United States and will yield to it if exerted, we would not for a moment believe that it is the purpose of 60 million of our race to be subject to permanent fate that has never been a part of what it means to be Anglo-Saxon. Jim Crow had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And what we fail to realize is Jim Crow is not just about laws of prohibition. It's about a mindset of inferiority. Now, let's put a pin in that for a moment. If you wrote your word down, would you mind raising your hand and just sharing it? Yes, ma'am. Sharp dress. Yes, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Respect. Yes. Cool hair. Cool. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Intelligent. Yes.
I wrote down black.
Black.
And the reason I wrote that down is that I am, even to this day, always just subliminally or conscious. I survey a room and I make note, not that I do anything about it, about how many black people are in the room. And that's what, when you stood up, you know, I thought those other things too. But that was the first thing that came down.
Thank you. I'll tell my wife that, yes. Roster, okay. All right. Yes, sir. Scholar. Now, here's the point. In the late 1990s, NYU did a study called First Impressions. And they said we make 11 decisions in the first 7 seconds of looking at someone. Now, why were you able to make such positive assessments of me? Well, a bow tie, but what else? You know me. But suppose I had on jeans and a t-shirt with my roster, and I had my hat on backwards. Would you have made the same assessment? No, you would not. And so there's a sense in which, as we grow to meet and learn each other, our ability to assess is different. The problem with Jim Crow is we never get a chance to know each other. That's why the first time we did this at the Harm, we had 94 people. The second time we had over 110. I have no idea how many is in here, but what it demonstrates is there's a thirst not only for knowledge, but for relationship. And our systems, especially in this new administration, are we live? Oh my God. Put pause on that for a minute. A brother may have to move. Oh my God, if I come up missing, y'all know why, right? Right? These systems are designed to separate us because the people at the top know we actually are better together than we are apart. And one of the reasons that Dr. Nutter and Jackie Davis and I came together and started the other book is because we believed that if we're going to survive as a nation, we've got to get past all this other stuff. But we have to understand the history. We have to know that there are people who write these kinds of documents. We have to know that there's a group of people who would rather see us killing each other than working together. So Jim Crow was a caste system. It's a system that is designed to make sure that we are divided. But another important part of this idea of Jim Crow and the things that come from it, and I mentioned it earlier, is epigenetics. Now let me give you a definition. In my research, epigenetics, followed by an analysis of how they work, is transmitted and it affects the psyche of the people who are oppressed. In other words, what happens is when trauma is constantly being revisited, it can affect your gene pool. No one ever tells us that. No one ever tells us that we, as people of color, automatically know we're in the wrong place when we're in the wrong place. We know that when we go into a restaurant, we're not really wanted there. No one had to tell us that. It was part of gene makeup. And similar to DNA, it can be passed on from one generation to the next. However, DNA doesn't change, but epigenetic gene pool formations can be changed. But they can only be changed by information, environment, and relationship development. We have to understand that there's more going on here than just laws, executive orders. There is a medical experience that people of color experience on a consistent basis. And what happens is, because it becomes so normal, it's normal. It's normal to be stressed. Dr. Dunlap just mentioned it. Black people are much more quicker to die from hypertension than anyone else. Why? Because the stress becomes normal. We don't even realize that we've normalized always having pains in our chests. Now, some of us from smoking weed, I didn't smoke weed, but some of us from, just kidding. Y'all was looking so serious, I had to say something. Jesus. Some of it is because even when we pass the bar, we haven't passed the bar. We are taught to judge people based on what they look like without finding out what the heart is. The reason that some of you here were so complimentary, some of you know me, I preached at your church, you've seen me at other events and so on, and so there's an affinity. But think about this, and I really want, and this is why I asked you to say that. I asked you to write the word down. Out there in the hallway are jars with soil in them that came from lynching environments. I could be one of those. With all of my degrees, with all my education, with my great hair, I could be one of those. And not because I did anything wrong. Because the truth of the matter is most of those people who are out there that we are reminded of may not have done anything wrong other than being born black. And that's the danger of not understanding how Jim Crow works. Because it is a caste system that says, I don't care if you have a PhD. I don't care if you work at UF. I don't care if you're a doctor. All I care about is you don't look like me. And that's tragic. And the reason it's tragic is if we're not careful, we're going backwards. We're going backwards. And again, Dr. Dunlap mentioned the importance of allyship. If we don't come together cross-culturally, cross-gender, cross-racially, we are going backwards because there are those who still believe that they should not be ruled by people of African descent. And this document was written in 1898. And you can't tell me the concept is not still a part of what we are experiencing here in America today. And the problem with that is this. And you've probably heard me say this before, and I'm going to say it again. Frederick Douglass said an educated person is unfit to be a slave. So if that be the case, how do you enslave people? You keep them undereducated. So you take the books away. And one of the reasons I didn't want to go slides, because I want you to see me. I want you to see that my skin color does not make me any less or any better than anyone else. It makes me human. And the problem with Jim Crow is it had the ability to extract the humanity from the people who were being lynched and set on fire and raped and burned. I'm going to give you an assignment. There's a woman, her name was Mary Turner. She lived in Georgia, 1918. She was lynched. She was hung in a tree. Her baby was cut out of her stomach as she hung upside down. When the baby hit the ground, they stomped the baby's head and then riddled her body with bullets because she wanted justice for her husband. 1918. The Civil War is over 1865. That's only 53 years. And the point is, why don't you know this history? How many of us, if we knew some of this stuff, would be more empathetic and sympathetic to crossing cultures than we are if we don't know it? And again, going back to why Dr. Ron and Jackie Davis and I started the other book is because there was a sense. I preached at UCG. I got to tell you, man, it is one of the greatest churches in the city. Amen. Amen. Y'all can send me my check later. And the thing I liked about the church was, because I checked them out. You know, I Googled them before I got there. And I said, man, I don't see any black people in here, right? But the culture of the church was friendly. It was welcoming. At least not to me. It didn't matter to me that I was a black man with dreadlocks. what mattered was I came to serve. And I dare say, ladies and gentlemen, that where we are today, if you go back and study your history and you read about the Civil War and you read about Reconstruction and you read about Jim Crowism, you will see that we are rewriting that pattern. And I'm going to close with this, and then I'll have Dr. Dunlap back because open the floor for questions. One of the most important things you can learn about Jim Crowism is not just the black codes. It's the role of violence and homegrown terrorism. I am not concerned about Iran. I ain't concerned about Russia. I'm concerned about some of them brothers down in South Florida. High Springs. Because it is the homegrown terrorism that is fueled with such a hatred that will tie a man behind a truck and drag him through the city until his limbs falls off. It's the kind of hatred that will go into a school and kill kids. That's not overseas. That's right here. It's homegrown terrorism. And as long as we can reflect or deflect to China or Russia or Iran, we forget about the good old boys who live right here in our own state. And that's scary. Because one would assume that if you present properly, you got your suit on, you got your bow tie on, that's going to make a difference. It only makes a difference if you have some history with the person with the bow tie on. Does that make sense? So what have we learned? Shopping while black can be dangerous. When Natasha Harlan was murdered, I lived in LA at the time. One of the reasons the riot started is because Rodney King had just gotten beaten recently. I was on a ministerial group that helped quell the riot before the riot. Because we argued, okay, we recognize Natasha's been murdered, we're gonna handle that because we know we're gonna get these cops who beat Rodney King. We have the video. Let's not blow this. So they changed the venue and they moved the court case from LA to Simi Valley, which is 99% white. And when they came back with those not guilty pleas, that's when the riot started. Because what they were saying is, we didn't see what we saw. We didn't see people overrun the White House. They were just rowdy visitors. Oh, you hate, that's metaphorically. We have got to become more intelligent about how we are socialized. Because it's too easy, if you don't look like me, to blend in with the guys who are really doing the damage and not be affected at all. And as Dr. Dunlap said, we need allies. Can't do this thing by ourselves. God bless you. Thank you so much. So we're going to open the floor for questions. You can use that mic right there if you have a question. Please ask them all to Dr. Dunlap, please.
Let's make sure this mic works okay? Okay, good.
They're going to ask questions.
You right here, right?
I've just got a quick comment. I read what was almost a throwaway line in the book about segregated housing policy. The author said one of the negative results or features of Jim Crow was that it gave white people a false sense of superiority. And the bad news about that, I think, and you please respond if you think it's worth it, is once you start to believe in your own superiority, you don't want to give that up.
You talking about Rothstein's book, The Color of Law?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That was where that was.
So I'll respond real quickly. So there's a book called The Color of Law, and Rothstein writes about how the government actually produced various forms of poverty. You've heard the term project. They live in the projects. Well, the project is not only a verb, it's also a noun. It becomes a noun when people live in it, but it was a verb. It was a project. The government wanted to figure out how can we supply housing for these soldiers who come back from the war. So it was a project. Will it work? What happened was once the Great Migration begins and blacks began to move from the South, they started redlining communities and then giving money to white communities to move to the suburbs, suburban. We call them the burbs, but what happened was they moved from the urban environment to a suburban environment because there were two environments, rural and urban. But once these blacks start coming from the South, they wanted to make sure that they didn't live in the same communities with white people, and so they created the suburbs. And they raised the cost of the houses for black people, and they gave all this money to white people to move out into the suburbs. But the government did that. That had nothing to do with our cleanliness. It had nothing to do with our being lazy. It had to do with the government constantly maintaining this notion of racial separation. Any other questions?
One thing that always astounded me was this idea of post-racial, like after President Obama, and I know that's probably a whole talk, but if you could speak to that.
Well, I think we've demonstrated today that we are not in a post-racial society. We are struggling with racism, now as much as ever, I guess. It may wear different clothes, but it's the same animal. Would you add to that?
You add to it? Sure. So I have this thing. I asked this question. What would Africa be like if there were no white people? Right? Because why is it we're constantly having to prove ourselves when the reason you came into the community is because we were already doing it? In Egypt, we know that the pharaohs and the Egyptians invented mathematics. We know they invented the alphabet. We know they were architects. We know that in places like Kumasi, they grew yams and they grew collard greens and they grew rice that they brought here to America. We even brought our own hoes. The two-hand hoe. When you plant rice, you got to have a hoe. And they had a short-handled hoe. In other words, watch this. Slaves were not brought from Africa to America. Technicians and scientists and doctors and architects were brought, right? Because the Europeans recognized the skill sets and the technology. But because somebody just said to me, I think it was Sister Mary, was telling me about a book she's reading, and she was talking about Sherman, and she said, how come they never told us that there were migrants marching with him? I said, because somebody else controlled the narrative, right? The African says, until the lion begins to write, the hunter always has the best story. And so the people who are writing the books are talking about post-racial America, but they ain't us. Because we're not talking about that, because we realize it's still very much alive and well.
And I'd like to just add, I think the biggest indicator of the fact that we are not in a post-racial society is that preschool to prison pipeline. The capitalism involved in that, the money that's being made off of the privatization of the prison system, the inequitable policies, the withdrawing quality education from communities that aren't resourced enough to have what they need in order to have the best educations, the lack of literacy, which is a problem for everybody here in Gainesville, but especially for the Black and brown children. Without literacy, that's how you learn how to maneuver within a society, how to maneuver successfully. And so without that being very, very strong at the base, and without access to that, that is going to just help keep that preschool to prison pipeline strong. And that's a systemic issue. It's not the family's fault. It's the policies and the systems. So we would like to think that because we had a Black president, because we had Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl, which I loved his show, by the way. But because we have these spurts of apparent success, none of that takes away the preschool to prison pipeline and all of the other systemic things, related to it. Hope that.
Yes, sir.
In the abstract of deeds of my property, I ran across one of the requirements was to ensure that only someone of the Caucasian race could own this piece of property up until 1970. Yeah. That was stated in the deed. Yeah. We all recognize that MAGA wants to put blacks and browns back into servitude. They want to put gays and transgender back in the closet. They want women back into hoop skirts, barefoot and pregnant. My question to you is, how the heck are you going to keep your job?
Yeah. You asking me or?
Both of you. You both are in an academic world.
Thank God I'm retired. I just pray they don't take away Social Security.
That's a good question. First of all, what you were describing was what they call restrictive covenants, if you're not familiar with it. But it's where banks and homeowners and loan agencies came together and said we will not sell our homes to certain people. I'm 72. I could retire. I'm not ready yet. I'm still having fun. So I don't know. My wife and I have talked about it, but I still think that there are lives that God wants me to continue to affect. So I'm going to work until I can't. I don't think that we're at the end of the road. I just think there's some bumps there, and we just have to struggle through it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So my question is, as allies, what can we do?
You brought it up first.
As allies, what can you do? First of all, what everyone is doing today, getting educated, not only about the mainstream, not only what the Lion has allowed us to have available, but doing that extra digging so that so that the rest of us, so that our stories can be told, and not just from the perspective of those in power. So that's the first thing, is educating ourselves, as allies, educating yourselves, further educating yourselves. I want you to know that I believe that if you ever think that you have arrived, that you've learned enough, you've done enough, you've learned enough, you went to that seminar, you went to that talk, you wrote that letter, the moment you think you have arrived as an ally, or as a person trying to understand all these issues, the moment you think you've arrived is the moment you become a danger to other people. It is a lifelong process for all of us. And so I say keep learning, keep speaking out, keep protesting, keep putting your neck on the line. Put your neck on the line too. We're out here every day we wake up, we're putting our neck on the line. You know, maybe help raise some of these children that are out here who have been devastated by the crack epidemic and the racist policies and the now the heroin epidemic and the all of these other epidemics that are bound to get worse. So maybe trying to help raise the next generation. If you love children, if you're inclined. Personally, it's the best thing I ever did. You know, helping with 2 children who are already here. Again, I would do it all over again. If I had to do it again, if I were offered the opportunity to do it again with those 2. Now, I'm not saying I'm trying to get, but so helping with the children, if not raising children, volunteering, helping children learn how to read, giving them access to books with characters that look like them, protesting, showing up for these protests, not putting your dollars where people are engaging in racist practices, where people don't care about black and brown people. Don't put your dollars there. Creating a fuss, ruffling feathers, being more careful about how you invest your money, your time. Money talks. Money talks.
Thank you so much. So to further the answer to the question, one of the reasons that the White Declaration of Independence was written in 1898 is because in Wilmington, North Carolina, there was a coalition called the Fusion Politics, where poor whites, blacks, those on the outside came together and they began to control the electorate. So one of the ways that we do that is to engage in the political process as a part of a collective. One of the reasons that critical race theory is so challenged is because one of the tenets is called interest convergence. Interest convergence has 2 basic components to it as I examine it. The first is this. Only when poor whites, middle-class whites, and rich whites benefit from the same ideology is it okay for black and brown people to benefit from the same thing. their interests converge. But the other aspect of interest convergence is this. When poor whites, middle-class whites, and upper-class whites vote together, even though the poor whites won't benefit, their interests converge to make sure black and brown people don't. So people will vote against Obamacare, not realizing that the Affordable Care Act is the same thing because it's got Obama's name on it. And so what's happening now is they're voting their race and not their need. And so what we have to be able to do is help people understand that when Bacon's Rebellion occurred in 1665, it was the same, it was a fusion. It was the Native Americans, it was the poor whites, the poor blacks that came against the elites. That's how racism actually started. They started giving power to the poor whites over anybody who had color in their skin, and that's how this separation began. So how do we do it? We've got to become more politically minded, right? And look at the community and our humanity as why we vote, not our race. Because some people will vote their race and still lose.
If I could just add one other thing too, is in your organizations, in your churches, in your community involvements, and so forth, be sure that in your programs, curriculums, your offerings, things that you're trying to do, be sure that you have different perspectives and voices and people and things like that. Some of my beloved friends from the Writers Alliance of Gainesville are here. And one of the things that I'm really appreciating about being a part of the Writers Alliance of Gainesville is that my goal is to bring more, I'm just going to say the word, diversity to their programming, to their offerings. I'm on the board, and I am unapologetic about it. They know that is my goal, and they are tolerating me and have not kicked me out, and I really, really appreciate it that they're making space and making room. But everybody should be doing this work. Everybody should be doing this. The beautiful school teacher talked about the inclusivity. The inclusivity, that is the very beginnings of it from a very, very young age. So that's another part of being an ally, So just wanted to say that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for each of you. I still believe in equal time. I like to look up the corporations that behind our retailers. I've looked up the board of Target, of Walmart, of various ones, just to see who's there at the top. So I very seldom see any diversity there. And I want to know if you think that it's only from those C-suite, A-suites, or what do you call them, C-suites? Whatever, the top of the command. C-suite, yeah. But is it only from those C-suites that policy comes down, or is it broad socialization of multitudes of people that is the reason retail is a problem? And let me go ahead and ask your question to my elder. And you were 4 years older when I was born, so you're my elder. I love how you talked about the what if, because I read a lot of Afrofuturism, and I like to look at different ideas of what history could have been. What if there had been no Berlin Conference? What if there had been no triangular slave trade and colonization? Or even further back, what if the second golden age in the Nile Valley had included throwing the door wide open when Thales down to Hippocrates came begging and let them in? and reabsorbed and recombined at that time? Or what if the 13th Amendment didn't have a loophole for slavery of the incarcerated? Of course, the Constitution won't matter when the orange one gets his constitutional convention, but all those what ifs. Thank you.
So let me clarify, when I made this statement, what would Africa be like if there were no white people? First of all, I'm not talking about white people, because there was no such thing of white people until 1790. They were Anglo-Saxon, they were German, they were Italian. There was no such thing. So I use that metaphorically to help us understand that conceptually we could have done a lot better living together than we would have separately. But to answer your question, we would have just had, if there had not been all those different changes in Africa, we'd have Wakanda. Right? We'd have the Black Panther, right? We'd have the scientism. We wouldn't have to worry about the colonizers coming into the country, to the continent, because we'd have been running it ourselves. I think that, as Dr. Dunlap said, we don't realize how much power we have with the dollar. If we would stop shopping, there was a place in Oklahoma called Black Wall Street. It wasn't the only one. They were all across the country, because black people had to provide for themselves, economically, socially. The reason we have black fraternities and sororities, the reason we have the National Black Association of Lawyers, the reason we have the Black Association for Psychiatrists, all these different organizations come into existence because somebody didn't want us in, right? So we know how to do it for ourselves. But as Dr. Dunlap said earlier, we're just gracious. And even when you kill our kids, we still pray for you, because that's who we are. It's in our ethos to be in community. And I think that one of the things that we can learn from that experience is that we all have the capacity to be that gracious. The question is, are you willing to give up the benefit of being white to do that? Ooh, that was a good one right there.
Someone asked, is that possible? Something is going through my head called, I don't think I've ever heard it before, but it's being downloaded, called shedding whiteness. Shedding whiteness. We might not be able to change our ethnicity, or even, I want to be black. I want to stay black, I'm going to stay black too. But anyway, I do acknowledge my multiracial background, But anyway, to shed whiteness, though, is to be aware of what it means to be white in this society and the privileges that come with it. And, as a multiracial woman, I had to become aware of what it means to be a light-skinned black woman in this society and among my black community. I had to understand that, and I experienced racism like everyone else, but I also don't experience it like a lot of my black sisters and brothers, or like my black mother did. I may not experience it to the same extent, but I do experience it. But I had to also understand that sometimes when people don't like me because I'm light-skinned, that's not their fault and that's not my fault. It comes with the fact that Massa was giving privileges to the light-skinned people way before I came along. But also, sometimes people miss the pain that the light-skinned women went through too, of sometimes being the ones abused the most, sexually and so forth. But all the black women were being abused. So there's a lot of complexities in men being aware of their maleness and the privilege that comes with that. White people being aware of their whiteness and the privilege that comes with that. Light-skinned black folks being aware of our privilege and what comes with that. Straight people being aware of our privilege and what comes with that. All of us shedding, examining, being aware of our privilege so that we can be constantly examining it and not exploiting the world around us because of the privilege that we carry. And again, that's a lifelong process. And if you think you've arrived, you are dangerous. Never forget that.
Well, I've just got a couple of comments I'd like to make. First of all, I want to thank you guys. I am learning so much from this. And your question about why don't we learn about more of this, I mean, I'm learning so much stuff about American history and Florida history that I didn't learn in school. I think there's a law in place now that we can't talk about things that make people feel uncomfortable. That's why. All right, so you mentioned Wilmington, North Carolina. I was at a conference in Wilmington, and I went to the museum you're talking about in Wilmington, and it is an outstanding facility. I need to go back. And I think it would be a great idea if we arranged a field trip to go there, because there's so much about interracial history that I learned. For instance, Wilmington is the only place in the country where an elected government was overthrown by force, and you talked about it. I'm wondering if there is a compilation of Jim Crow laws that were in effect in Alachua County. I'd like to see that, if that exists. Somebody asked, what can we do to further the cause here? And volunteering in schools, I think would be a great way to do that. I volunteer in a pre-K school, and there are times when I am the only male in the building. So that, I think, carries some benefit. So if any of us can volunteer in schools, I think the schools would love to have it. And finally, Rik, your question about first thoughts, I was occupied with something else, so I didn't even see you stand behind the podium. But your question, what would my first reaction be seeing you, would have been completely different if you'd shown up in biker garb.
Right, right. Because some people walk past me at Hale. Let me answer this question real quick. So one of the documents you might want to look up is called Understanding Racial Inequity in Alachua County. It was prepared by the University of Florida, the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, BEBR. I will shoot this over to Dr. Ron or Jackie, and they can throw it up so you can have access to it. But that's one of the documents that we used. And then secondly, I want to capitalize on something. I'm going to get your question. Don't go nowhere. In Louisiana, they used to have these quadroon balls. You ever heard of them? Quadroon balls. You know what a tenyon is? A tenyon is a hairpiece that black women wear on their hair to tie their hair up. And quadroons were light complexion women that European men would date, and they have them as concubines. And they do their hair up and everything. And the white women got so upset that because of the way they did their hair, they made them wear tenyon. The tenyon is a hair wrap. And because there was a way, because they were light but not white. But you couldn't tell. And the European men were just falling head over heels over these black women, so they started making them wear head wraps to identify that even though you're light, you're still not white. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I don't have a question, just a few comments. First of all, amazing job as usual, Dr. Rik and Dr. Michelle. This has been most enlightening. And I want to say to Dr. Michelle, the Shopping While Black is still alive in 2025. I experienced it just a couple of weeks ago. And Dr. Rik, when Alachua Newlandsville did our soil collection ceremony, I was in charge of doing the lighting the candles for it. And some of the comments I made came out of my intuition, which my grandmother left very strong in me. But you alluded to it today, that this stuff can get in your cells, and the brainwashing that we received when we were enslaved stays with us and wreaks all kind of havoc in our community. So I'm glad to hear that it wasn't just my intuition, that your studies have pointed out that these things persist. The last thing I want to say is the wonderful program that Alachua County Community Remembrance Project brings to you. We have no dedicated source of funding, and the funds we get come out of people's pockets, most namely from the United Church of God, from Commissioner Chestnut, from Brother Carl Smart, and Jackie Davis, and many others. So we want to let you know that our donation jar is still open, and if you want to drop a little something in it on your way out, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Just want to say thank you so much. You have no idea. I was down in, this is Daytona Bike Week, and I was down in Daytona, and if I had known that Daytona was coming the same week as this, we'd have had this a different week. But I had to ride back up here. But we are overwhelmed that you have demonstrated such an interest in what we think is important, and what we think is a community building. So thank you. Won't you give yourself a big round of applause? And we have our last session in April. It's at the Cotton Club. Come on out, hang out. We're going to have a great time. And again, thank you so much. Yes?
Please don't let it be your last session.
Go ahead.
I just want to shout out my pastor, Pastor Ernestine Butler of Agape Faith Center, and of everyone, all the familiar faces, but thank you, Pastor Butler. Seeing you here today made me so happy. Okay, and everyone else who I know. Love y'all.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have a comment. I want to say this. I've encountered this a lot because I do the work on racial identity development. And white guilt is very, very common. And I want to tell you, when you feel that shame or that guilt, that is your opportunity to say, what am I going to do with that? Because you don't want to stay in that space. You want to transform it into something productive, be it going in and helping the kids read, be it whatever, but you knowing that you're doing something to make a change, and you already are, because I know what you do concerning young people with special needs. That's your special area, and you have written a book, and you're doing a lot. But concerning your feeling shame and guilt about the racial issues, you can transform that into something powerful and something beautiful. And there's a lot of people in this room who are already doing that.
We have had, as human beings, we work as social groups. That's what human beings are. We have had great teachers from different parts of the world over the millennia. Let's think about that. And I just want to say thank you for coming out, and we'll see you next month. Okay? And keep going on. Thank you very much.